Okay.
All right. See my screen in the right place.
Yes, sir.
So I wanted to do a class on don't miss the message. And initially, I think in the announcement, it's also don't miss the miracle. And I've never done this before. I've taught classes on finances uh, many times, but I've never done this. And I kind of felt it was appropriate given where we are. Um, just kind of think about what's happening in our reality and don't miss what message there may be for us. And it might not even be a financial message. Um, I think, I did the Family Friday. One of the things it was for me that I needed to take better care of my health was the message I was getting. But if there is a message, let's not miss it. I think, um, you know, a lot of because I work for a financial planning firm, a lot of my friends are financial planners. I talk to them, and one of the things that keeps coming up that our children, particularly, which I don't think any of our kids have joined on yet, but we teach them that they should have an emergency fund. But I've had an emergency fund a really long time, and really never had a real deep need for it. Um, so, but now there's this reality that even if my personal finances aren't impacted, I know people who are really impacted. So it's a real life lesson, hopefully, that we do need to be prepared. That particularly if you have a short term need, use a credit card and that's you deal with it. But rarely do you encounter does everyone encounter? Certainly, a lot of people do, but rarely does a lot of people encounter 6 months emergencies. And so, even if you're not impacted like that, I just want to kind of think through how we prepare for it happens again. Somebody shared a podcast with me about a business one that if you weren't prepared as a business to operate virtually, who could have ever imagined or even thought of a reality of a pandemic? So if you weren't prepared, you get a pass. But if you're not prepared the next time, then that's on you. And that's kind of the idea I wanted to talk through that, even if we're not impacted, let's be prepared that it could next time happen to us. I shared this in one of the earlier classes that, 9/11, who would have thought that pilots would have been out of work for a really long time, um, and a lot of them, because they have highly skilled profession, but it's a lot of skills that are non-transferable. So you just never know what's going to happen and what could happen. And I feel very blessed that my job has not really been seriously impacted by either 9/11 or this. But at the same time, I don't want to be I want to be prepared should it happen and it does actually hit me. So as we go, again, as I always like to do, a quick preview or review of what we talked about before. A lot of what I'm talking about is focused around these 4 H's of financial health, where our heart, is understanding stewardship and contentment, and hopefully we'll have time to talk about contentment today. And then faith, am I living out my faith with my finances, and am I seeking wisdom from God in managing our finances? And our behavior always follows our heart or our beliefs. And then hopefully from that belief system, we create good habits of spending less than you earn, avoid the use of debt, give generously, plan for financial margin, both current cash flow margin and liquidity, and saving for emergencies, and set long-term goals. And as we develop those good habits, then we measure our health by how we're spending our money in the 4 different live, give, owe, and grow. Um, and then as we become more healthy, our margin meter uh, becomes more moves from struggling over to surplus, and having the surplus in our finances is what gives us um, which gives us financial freedom. So that's a quick recap of kind of what we're doing. We talk about the margin meter in the study done from 2011 to 14. There were very few Christians who were in the surplus. So let's all set a goal toward moving our meter towards surplus, and the idea being to have the surplus allows us to be more generous. We have, as we try to move our margin meter, which is building the grow, which is current cash flow or savings either for retirement or emergencies or whatever it is, as we try to build that financial margin, we have competing spending priorities. And financial freedom comes from that margin. And there are no independent financial decisions. To increase one area, you have to either generate more income, which unless it's a gift, you're going to have to pay tax on it. So you got to generate, much more than $1 to get $1, or we have to borrow or take from one of the other slices of pie. And I think it's important to think that, I'm talking about building financial margin, but none of these areas are bad. I have a strong bias against debt, but it's not bad. We've used debt in our life, so it's not always bad. It's just the idea that it needs to be a last resort, not a first resort. But lifestyle is good. A lot of things in your lifestyle are an investment in your family and your future and your community. So the lifestyle is not bad. Giving, of course, I also have a bias towards that ought to be a really important slice of our pie. But all of them are good. It's just creating priorities to determine how you allocate that. And the freedom we get to invest in our lifestyle, to give more, to pay off debt, comes from increasing our cash flow. So this is from the website moneywise.org. I just want to share this and won't spend a lot of time on it, but this was a really good, as I talk about there, all of the four live, give, owe, and grow are good. You may be really good in one category and want to work on another category. And this chart kind of gives you 3 levels of attacking and improving whatever the category that you're interested in improving. So for debt, first repay credit card debt, then work on all debt other than the mortgage, and then work on your mortgage. And if you want to work on giving, just start, and then kind of determine what a percentage that you could do. And then as you continue to work on that, improve, eventually work towards sacrificial giving. So there's kind of a progression for all 4 categories that was, I thought, a really helpful kind of stage for, you're setting priorities. So if I decide one of these is my priority right now, here's kind of a path to make improvement, because it takes work. I shared this initially last week, and this was also from MoneyWise. I have no connection with MoneyWise, by the way, but it's just got a lot of really good information on it. So the 7 things not to do with your money in uncertain times. And, one is not respond out of fear. Fear is something that God calls us not to do quite frequently. He says that very often in both the Old and the New Testament, to not act out of fear. But certainly there's uncertainty, and that is going to be very tempting to create fear, but we need to fight that battle and do our part and trust God. Don't focus on what you can't control. You can't control what happens in the stock market, but you can't control your budget. You can't control your spending. You can work on improving one of those 4 areas of spending your money. And the topic of this, your retirement and stock market, don't watch that too closely. It's interesting. I looked at ours recently for the whole year, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, but it took such a sharp dive, but then it's right back where it was. Um, so that could have created a lot of anxiety, and it did for a lot of people. Um, but as long as I don't need it in the next month or so, then it shouldn't create that anxiety. Um, look for opportunities to be generous. Don't let cutting your giving be the first thing you cut. That should be the last thing you cut. Try to continue to be generous, and don't deviate from the long-term plan. And if you don't have a long-term plan, create a long-term spending plan and stay with the plan. If you're in a situation where you have lost your job or your income stream, or in being contacted by creditors, don't avoid it. Communicate with them, um, and be honoring, and just tell them you're doing what you can. But then kind of the topic of today is don't ignore what God might be saying to you, because often there's a lesson in what we're seeing. So I've referred to this story a couple times. I wanted to talk through it a little bit today because this is really, I think, a really impactful story from 2 Kings of the widow's oil. So I'm just going to read it and then kind of comment, make a couple comments. So this is from 2 Kings chapter 4. The wife of a man from the company of prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that he revered the Lord. But now his creditor is coming to take my 2 boys as his slaves." Elisha replied, "How can I help you? Tell me, what do you have in your house?" "Your servant has nothing at all except a small jar of olive oil." Elisha said, "Go around and ask your neighbors for empty jars. Don't ask for just a few. Then go inside, shut the door behind you and your sons, pour oil into all the jars. As each is filled, put to one side." She left him, shut the door behind her and her sons. They brought the jars to her and kept pouring. When all the jars were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another one." But he replied, "There is not a jar left." Then the oil stopped flowing. She went and told the man of God, and he said, "Go sell the oil and pay all your debts, and your sons can live on what is left." So what can we take from that story? Um, the first thing is she asked for help. I think this is such an important part of giving that we don't hear enough. But in order for people to be generous, people in need have to be available to receive the generous donation. So as we have a need and we don't ask for help, we're depriving somebody that wants to be generous from the blessing of being generous. So I just, she was in a desperate state, and she went and she cried for help. So if you're in need, or people are in need, just really encourage them that the right thing to do is to ask for help. But also note where she asked for help. She went to the man of God, and maybe in our modern time that's the church. Maybe it's just another godly person or family that But she went to a person who could help, who could not only potentially have resources, but could tap into the unlimited resources of God. So interestingly, Elijah didn't give from his own resources, although we see other places in Scripture that he was a wealthy person. But he didn't just say, "Hey, here's some money, go pay your creditor." He let her participate in the process. And the first thing Elisha did was said, "How can you help yourself? What do you have?" Um, and then he used what she had to provide for her. And then finally, at the end of the story, he said that he uh, she got enough to pay her debts, but she also got enough to live, and she wasn't even asking for that. So I think it's really important that you can go and ask a person that has the resources, can you help me do this? And they can provide it and solve that one problem. But if we miss the miracle of seeking God first, then God is likely and will and may use people to provide. But if we don't start with seeking help from God, we may be limited in how he provides or how it's provided for. So ask for help from people, but don't forget to ask for help from God, because the way God provided was more than she even asked for. So I think this is just such a powerful story of, somebody that was in need. They turned to Elisha, being a man of God, really turning to God. Um, and God allowed her to participate. So she had a part in it. So not only did she do the point of but then she had to go sell it. So she didn't just get a pile of money to go do it. So we need to be doing our part, whatever that is, too. So we seek help, ask God, but we do what we know to do and what we're able to do, and we participate in the solution. And then God can and often does provide miraculously in abundance. So that's why, I said don't miss the message, but also don't miss the miracle, because God is, in my opinion, still in the miracle business. So as we think about preparing for uncertainty or the future or the next pandemic or 9/11 or whatever it is, as we think about the message that we may take away from what's happening in the world today, because I think I shared this one in the debt message, but the two things we want to do is maximize flexibility and minimize financial constraints. So here's what I think that means. So maximize financial flexibility is what we've been talking about, is create cash flow margin. So that means either get more income or spend less in one of the other buckets. And I also said, don't cut your giving. So that should be the last thing you cut, but it certainly could be a situation where that needs to be cut. But somehow create cash flow margin to be able to meet long-term needs and to be able to plan. Create an emergency fund. Interestingly, so I work for a financial planning firm. The conventional wisdom is, first, and Dave Ramsey is save $1,000. That's step one, and then start working on other things as you build a bigger emergency fund. But as you become, positioned to create a better emergency fund, it's always 3 to 6 months living expenses, not 3 to 6 months income, but living expenses. But the firm I work for now has kind of started encouraging people to save 12 months, not universally, but that's a concept that is becoming maybe more accepted, is that it's not just 3 to 6 months, it's 12 months. And that seemed like a really crazy idea until there was a pandemic. And then, people did have 12 months living expenses. They were very thankful. So, but whatever it is, even if it's just $1,000, create that emergency fund. So then when something happens, you don't have to tap into your cash flow margin to satisfy those emergencies. And then save for the long term. In the chart I showed last week, there's a lot of things you can save for, to buy a business, to provide for children or grandchildren education, to pay off debt, to, just lots of things that you can do, or to give more. But there's lots of reasons to save for the long term, but start doing it. Save for even, short term, mid-term, like buying a new car that you may need in 4 or 5 years, but start saving so you have that financial flexibility. So, your car breaks down, you have to buy one quickly, then you're more prepared. And then the second thing is to minimize constraints. We talked a lot about this in the debt session, that having debt and having to satisfy the debt service is a financial constraint. So avoid debt when you can. If you're in debt, work towards managing or eliminating that. And then maintain liquidity, meaning you can have a lot of resources, but unless you can get to it, it's not helpful. And the two obvious things are, you may have, tremendous amount saved for retirement, but if you're not in retirement age, there's a penalty to getting it out. So that's not liquid. You may have you may not have a mortgage, you may have your house paid for, it may be worth a lot, but you can't fund emergencies with equity unless you go borrow more money. So that's not liquid. You may have heard the term house poor. So they have a house that may be paid for, but they don't have any liquidity or they don't have access to cash. So that's a constraint that your investments or retirement or your net worth is tied up in illiquid assets. So maintain liquidity. And then count the cost of lifestyle commitments. So you may have, for example, you buy a new car, you buy a really nice, expensive car. You may have the money to do it, but that means you probably have more higher insurance costs. Likely, if it's an expensive car, you have a higher maintenance cost. So that's not a cost of the car, but it's a cost of the lifestyle commitment you make. You make whatever the decision is. A lot of things that do that. You buy a lake house, then you've got to have upkeep for that. So it's not just the cost of doing that, but it's the cost, the commitments that go along with that. So and I'm not saying don't do it, just count the cost, because that's going to create some financial constraints.
Do you have an opinion or a suggestion for what's more important, saving or paying off debt, or is it something that you want to do at the same time?
I think it depends on your situation, but as a general rule, I think, to follow the Dave Ramsey logic, if a lot of your debt is 18% credit cards, then you ought to focus on that. But if it's, mortgage or maybe a low interest car loan, then I generally think it's okay to do it at the same time. I think, first make sure you have something for emergencies, whether it's $1,000 or 3 months or 6 months, but have something saved to account for emergencies, so the issue isn't compounded. But assuming you have some level of savings for emergency, I think it's appropriate to do it together. I think particularly if you're saving for retirement and you're with an employer that matches, I think that ought to be kind of a priority in conjunction with paying off your debt. So it depends on the level of your debt and what you have in savings currently, but I think it's kind of a balance is probably appropriate, is my opinion. But again, if you're really far skewed one way or the other, or a lot of your debt is, if the debt is significant, it ought to be part of your long-term plan. And you make a long-term plan that may be 10 years. And so how do you get where you want to be in 10 years? And it may be some combination. So I don't think there's a one size fit all answer, but generally I think it's wise to do some of both. So this is a old slide. So when it says recent, that's really not recent. Probably this is from a class I did a long time ago, but I think the message is still relevant, even though that may have shifted some. But there's a tendency to think I'll start saving later, or I'll start paying off my debt later. Maybe another answer to your question is whether you do them together or one or the other, don't make sure you do something. And either focus on one or focus on both, but focus on something. And I think there's always a tendency, I know I did it when I first got out and started working, that I always had this idea that I'll start saving later, or I'll worry about this debt later. But the reality is that the more you make, the more opportunities you have to spend. And this survey is, we think that if we don't have money, it's really hard to save. And yes, it gets easier, but it doesn't, the results of the survey says it doesn't totally get easier, because you look, the blue is people that have no savings. And so you got somebody, even though it's not a huge number, there are people that are making over $150,000 and have no savings. And there, if you look up to the red and black, over 50% have less than $5,000. So that's pretty close to no savings when you have $150,000 or more of income. So the idea that I'll do this later is just a bad plan. If you can't do it on $25,000, you're probably not going to do it on 150 either. And again, certainly there's improvement in people that are doing it. But the idea is, wherever you are, you work on creating the right amount of cash flow margin that you can save something. You can save and give something. So to that point, financial planning 101, no matter how much money you have, no matter how much more you can earn, there will always be unlimited ways to allocate limited resources. And so the idea of financial planning is the continuous predetermined allocation of financial resources to unlimited changing alternatives. So a budget is telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. The idea of budget, and I hesitate to say this because it's not totally true, but Mindy and I have lived on some form of budget pretty much our whole marriage. And maybe that's just kind of figuring out how much we make and determining how much we'll spend and give. And so we're not spending, every Friday having a meeting talking about how we did on our budget, but we pay attention to it. And there's a resistance to budgeting because, people see it as restrictive, but I think that's the wrong way to look at it. A budget actually is freeing because you're setting it. So it's not like somebody's coming and saying, here's how much you have to spend on this. You're making a decision. You're setting your own budget. So then, if I've got X amount set aside to go out to eat every week, then I can go out to eat because I've set it aside. It's just making the decision up front. And I don't have to, if I have X amount set aside for buying clothes every month, I know I can go buy clothes, and I don't have to wonder or consider whether we're going to have a marital battle about whether we spend, because we decided it together, and we do our best to live it out. So again, it's not something we spend a lot of time on a daily basis or weekly or some even monthly basis, but we do once a year sit down and decide what we're going to do and how we have managed the cash flow, because determining it is one thing, but then managing is really the hard part. Is we decided that we would focus on what was hardest to manage. And we tried a lot of different ways to do it. And actually our very first financial plan was 25 years ago. And our advisor said, this is how you should do it, because that's how they did it. And it worked for him. It didn't work for us. And we tried another one, and it didn't work for us. And we tried several until we found one that did work for us. But the big takeaway for us was that there is no one way, because everybody, and some of you know this, but we're both accountants and we had trouble figuring out how to make the budget work. But eventually we did, because we tried it, it didn't work. And what we learned is that one doesn't work for us. So let's do another one. And we kept doing it until we found one that worked. And the focus of what we found that worked is we decided what was the hardest for us to manage, and we expended all our resources and all our efforts towards managing that one thing. And then we go to the next thing, and that's what worked for us. So let's encourage you to not see budgeting as bad, but see it as it really is. It's freeing. So again, there's no independent financial decisions, and think long term. I actually ran across a study. I thought I had it saved here, but there's a study by a Harvard professor, and he actually put it in a book. I can't remember the name of the book now. If anybody's interested, which you may not be glad to share it. But he set out to find out what was the secret to people's long-term financial success. So, people that were successful financially, what was the factor that led to that? And as he started the study, he said, surely it's going to be family of origin, intelligence, dedication, all these things that we would probably think. But what he found out was it was having a mindset of a long-term perspective. So the longer term your perspective in making financial decisions was what he found was the key to financial success, was thinking long-term. And I'll tell you, that's been true of us too, as we tried to work on our financial plan before we had an advisor and we worked it, and we were early in our marriage, and we just felt like we weren't getting anywhere. And finally, what the biggest takeaway from the financial plan was, he showed us a 10-year plan, because we've been focused on 1 month or 6 months, and just like, if we do this for 6 months, we're going to be right where we were. But as we looked at a 10-year plan, then it all became clear, and it was easier to focus on how we get to the next level by thinking a 10-year approach instead of a 6-month approach or a 1-year approach. And then it's okay, if we can be there in 10 years, that's worth the effort. But if we just look where we'll be in 6 months, it isn't worth it. We're just running in circles. But the longer term the perspective, the more likely you'll do it. So as we wrap up, I want to just kind of talk through that. I think one of the ways we find margin in our cash flow spending is through contentment. So we've talked a little bit about contentment over the last few weeks, but contentment is feeling comfortable and secure with where you are and who you are. And contentment is not achieved by acquiring or accumulating more. And contentment is not achieved by aligning your circumstances with your desires. So it's not about going and getting more, so then your desires will be fulfilled. There's a really great passage in Ecclesiastes 5:10. The first part of it is, whoever loves money will never have money enough. But the rest of the few verses were really impactful too, about not focusing on building up your worth, because that's not where you're going to find happiness. As Paul said, he learned how to be content. He didn't achieve it by getting more. In fact, he found contentment even in dire circumstances. And we learn it by focusing on what we have and not what we want. Colossians 3:2, set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. In Titus, for the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men. It teaches us to say no to ungodly and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright, godly lives in this present age. So that's how we find contentment. It isn't wrong to get more things and accumulate more things. It's just wrong to find our worth and contentment in having those things. And prosperity doesn't have the power to give contentment, and poverty doesn't have the power to take it away. Some of the verses that we've talked about already, this is where Paul says, I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I've learned to be content in whatever circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do everything through him who gives me strength. So he learned it. And, if you're familiar with Paul and his work, he had some pretty bad circumstances that he encountered, and he learned to be content there. But he also knew how to be wealthy. Right? He knew how to live wealthy and have plenty. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So wrapping up, some things to think about. When I did the Family Friday, I talked about emerging stronger, and I just think that's really an important opportunity that we can not miss the message that we may be talking. It just reminds me of a story. I was on the phone on a conference call Friday morning, and then one of the people in the call wasn't late, and his power was out. So he came on and said, "Sorry, didn't have power and I didn't have cell service at home." So he said, "I think God may be telling me that I need to distance myself from my cell phone." And the first thing that came to mind was, well, first he gave you 6 months of a pandemic and that didn't teach you. So now he took your power away. So let's don't miss the message and require another message um, to be taught what we should be learning through this pandemic. It's one of the things, what have we learned? What have we given up through this that we might be able to live without post pandemic? As I've shared that I'm eating a lot less and eating things that I used to really like. I've been doing it for 6 months, and I think I'm going to be able to do without it. We may be able to do without going out to eat as often as we did. We may not have to go on and do as much traveling. Whatever it is, what have we done? What have we done without that maybe we could live without and help us create cash flow margin? But on the other side of that, what have you added that you might want to continue? So we live, 100 yards from a big park that's got a 2-mile walking trail and picnic tables and ball fields and all that. And as we've gone through the pandemic, we're seeing a lot more families walking together, and either moms or dads walking with their kids, or whole families walking together and doing picnics that wasn't happening before. So it doesn't even have to be financial, but do you have more time to invest in your family that you didn't do before? So are you exercising more, or whatever it is that you're doing that's good, can we continue doing that so we emerge stronger? So then another thing, you can review your lifestyle spending and focus more on investing in yourself and others than on temporary comforts. And I want to share this because I think, as you look at the pie of lifestyle, you might get the idea that I think you should make that as small as you want. And that's not what I mean. I think one of the things you can do is create cash flow margin to buy time to be able to invest in other people. And just a quick story, maybe they can illustrate what I mean by this. And you can judge me on this if you want, but I've not cut my grass in 25 years, probably. I have, but not on a regular basis. And the reason I didn't, when our kids were little, we hired somebody to cut the grass, so I didn't have to spend my Saturdays working in the yard. And two things, when I had time, when they were taking a nap, I didn't go mow the lawn and wake them up and create marital stress. Or two, when they were awake, I didn't have to be cutting the grass when I could be spending time with them. Then later on, they got to be older. They're both boys. They got to learn how to cut the grass themselves. And so then, now that they're gone, I don't really have a really good reason for not doing it, but I just got used to not doing it. So we still are doing that. And the reality is, in my defense, when it starts having to be cut in March, I'm in tax season and don't have much time. So that's my reason for doing that. So spending is, in our case, we budgeted and we decided that was worth doing for us. And it could be something different for you, but spending money on your lifestyle isn't bad. Going on really nice vacations isn't bad. That's one of the ways we've invested in our family, was having vacations that everybody wants to go on. So we're away for a week and we, are investing in our family. So it's not so much not spending, but just be intentional about how you're spending and use your lifestyle spending as an investment. And again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't enjoy comforts. I believe God blesses us so we can enjoy life. So it's not that we shouldn't have temporary comforts, but just think towards investing in yourself and others. And if you need help, ask for it. If you have access, look for ways to help others. So hopefully, I had a little trouble kind of putting this in a sequential format because I had a lot of ideas I wanted to share, but like I said, I've never done this class before, but hopefully that was helpful in kind of helping with, at least with the idea to explore, is there something I can be doing differently with my finances in case this happens again? And if I wasn't impacted, what if I am? Am I prepared? Because if it happens again, you know that, I mean, who could have ever thought anything like this could ever happen? Who could have thought anything like 9/11 could happen? Um, so something totally different could happen that directly impacts my financial resources and income stream. And am I prepared to tackle that? As you talk about contentment, got two final quotes I'll leave you with. If anybody ever watched the movie Cool Running, if you haven't, you need to go watch it. It's a great movie about the Jamaican bobsled team. So John Candy was their coach, and he cheated to get a gold medal. And the guy said, "Why'd you do that?" And they're talking about the importance of winning a gold medal. And John Candy said, "Gold medal is a wonderful thing, but if you're not enough with that one, you'll never be enough with one." And maybe one you might respect more than John Candy's wisdom. Ben Franklin says, "Money never made a man happy, yet, nor will it. There's nothing in its nature to produce happiness. The more man has, the more he wants. Instead of its filling a vacuum, it makes one." So that's all I have. Hope that was helpful. Anybody have any questions or comments?